And on we move to transitions. Now it may feel like I'm only touching on certain subjects and then we're moving to other things. And you'd be absolutely right if you thought that. What the intention is to get you the basics of the different panels and the different things you can do within Premiere Pro. And then throughout this course, we'll build on those things. So moving on, we're going to be talking about transitions. And if you remember, early on, we did actually apply our first transition, which was dip to white. Nice, simple transition. Boom, done. However, there are so many different transitions we can do. We've come back to these two clips here, just so you know we're working with these again, so we're not adding anything new other than the different techniques. So just like we did in the previous section, we're going to delete this transition. We don't have to, but it can easily be overwritten, but we're just going to delete it for now. So if we go to our effects, I remember where we were searching in for crop and drop shadow. Well, there are a list of video transitions, and quite handily, they're right at the bottom here under video transitions. So if we twirl this down, there's going to be a number of transitions in here that you don't have. Film Impact is a great plugin that I use, and towards the end of this course I will be including overviews and some maybe deep dives into a number of plugins that I use on a daily basis. Some completely free, some are additional purchases, but all are worthwhile. I'm not pushing these things just to help people sell things. Premiere Pro, depending on where you are financially and where you are within your journey, is expensive enough. But Premiere Pro sadly can't do everything. And that's why we have plugins and third-party plugins, graphics, all that kind of stuff to help us with our workflow. As I said, a number of these are free and will always be free, but then you can buy more packs on them. So we're not going to be touching on Film Impact for now, although I may be looking at them a little bit later on in this course. But what you can see here, anything that's here that's not written Film Impact are stock included with Premiere Pro. There's 3D motion. If you twirl down, you can see all these. A number of them are quite dated. A number of them are quite, I was going to say basic, but a basic transition is quite good. Some of them, they look to almost be coming out of the 80s and 90s. Let's take Cube Spin for example. To apply a transition that isn't your default, you just grab it and drag it between at the beginning, at the end, or between two clips. And this is Cube Spin. And if I play it back to you, yeah, it's not great. You can affect the duration of a transition by getting to either one end, obviously either end if it's in the middle of a clip, the end that's going into the clip is at the beginning of the end, and dragging it out. So we can make the Cube Spin, as beautiful as it is, please note the sarcasm, last even longer. You get what I mean. Hopefully you'll get what I mean by like 90s effects. I mean 90s if they're lucky. Control Z to get rid of that, or to that change, and then Control Z again just to get rid of it forever. Flip over, exactly, very similar. Oh wow, I mean seriously, that would be a home movie in 1992. But in all honesty, if it's used at the right time, in the right place, and in the right context, it could be useful. What I mainly use are the dissolves, just purely because they're lovely. Crossfade is my default. How do I know that? Well, I can see it here because it's got a blue little box around it. And what that means is that the shortcut Shift D or Control D, depending on what you're applying to. Shift D works with everything. Control D works sometimes on some clips, so I just use Shift D. But if I have these two clips and I select them, if I hit Shift D, it applies that transition, the cross dissolve, to all points where a cross dissolve could be applied. So cross dissolve out of nothing is a fade in. It's effectively a fade in. Then we go to between the two clips and we cross dissolve. It's a crossfade, I don't know why they don't use the term crossfade, but that's what it is. It dissolves one into the other, and then a cross dissolve on the end of a clip is just out. You know, we're not doing anything. It's just out to black. However, if we get rid of that and we had, say, a color matte, harking back to the previous section, and do Shift D, it's not going to do anything. And that's because there are already transitions in play, and this is a different clip to this. So how do we apply a transition to here? Well, we've already said cross dissolve, drop it onto here. My shortcut for this is to hold down Control. When I don't hold down Control, we have these options. We have to trim that way or to trim that way. If I hold down Control and I go between the two, you see how the mouse cursor changes? If I click, that actually just highlights the clip end and clip beginning, the second clip being a color matte. If I then drag my cross dissolve onto there, that would just be the norm. But because I've highlighted it, if I Shift D, I'm telling Premiere Pro, I've highlighted these ends of these two clips. That's where I want to apply my default transition, Shift D being cross dissolve. And that, rather than fading to black, fades to light grey. These color mattes are so handy. I mean, more handy than even I give them credit. But anyway, back to transitions. So we have this cross dissolve applied here and here. But what else can we use? Well, we did it before. We could have a dip to white, bearing in mind that if there's another transition already on, this overwrites the transition. You can't have more than one transition running on two clips. It just wouldn't work. So dip to white, we had that before. Again, we can change out the duration, so we can have a slower dip to white, almost like a dreamy sequence there. We have film dissolve, which you see how we kept that length because we'd already set the length on a previous transition, and we've just overwritten it with another transition. If we play back film dissolve, it's very similar to cross dissolve. In fact, I think you'd be hard pushed to notice the difference. I don't know. I've never noticed the difference between film dissolve and cross dissolve. However, if you select any kind of transition between two clips, or at the end or at the beginning of a clip, you then will get options up here with regards to that transition. And we've got it here, starting from A and going to B. It's calling this A and this B. We always go down the alphabet as we go along the sequence. That's not to say that another clip on here would then be C and D, because this is already B. But then the transition that will be here will be affecting this one and this one. So then this becomes A and the next one becomes B in relation to that transition. That makes sense? I think it does. Show actual sources doesn't really make much of a difference. It makes no difference to the actual thing here, but it will make a difference in the effect controls. And you can actually select where it starts. If I tilde out now and I move it along, it will actually start dissolving in a different stage. I'm showing you this purely to show you. I've never affected any of these within the transition effect controls. Center at start, center at cut. That would, you see how that's centered at cut there, because that's how we did it. You could start at cut and it'll move it along. It just literally moves along a little bit more. What it does cleverly is it does actually keep, although this clip isn't here, this clip has completely taken over, it has continued this clip playing beneath, just so it doesn't go straight to black. Let me show you how that would look if it didn't do that. If I bring that up and add my dissolve on there, it would then go to black and then bring it up. So it is quite clever that Premiere Pro will do that. and it will continue that clip playing just until the transition is completely in. What I mean by in is that the transition is finished. Whenever the transition is finished, that next clip is 100% in. Morph cut is really handy, although it can only really be used in certain circumstances. Say you have a talking head and someone is doing a bit to camera and you've had to cut it and you can't cover it with B-roll, that being another bit of footage over the top to hide the cut. Morph cut can come in really handy. It's a really good transition when you're doing product videos and you're trying to bring in different things on a static shot. But if I show you what Morph cut does here, it's a really CPU intensive transition, and it's amazing how intensive it is when you judge just how small it looks within this whole setup. You see how this is all starting to pixelate? It's because it's trying to morph one into the other. You see how this has also gone red? I'm just going to pre-render in there, out there, and control and enter just to pre-render. Just thinking that might not be default. So just to double check, I'm just going to go to keyboard shortcuts and bring this over, and I'm going to type in render. So render into out is control enter. That's what I have set. Remember when we tried to hit enter before and it was render effects into out? If there are no effects, it won't render. It won't pre-render. So I have this set to control enter. I have a feeling that this wasn't the default, so you might need to set that, but I have it control enter and it works perfectly for me. So that's what I've done there. I've just rendered into out, right click in the gray space and clear in and out. You don't have to do that, but it's just nicer for my eye. And if I play back this morph cut, I mean, you've seen what they're trying to do, and you've probably seen different music videos that maybe have that effect. It's quite nice. And if we deep dive and think about it, what it does is at the beginning of the start of the transition, it pauses that video, so it can then morph into the next video. It's paused, and as we get to the end of the transition, we continue. Now this footage it hasn't really worked too well with. It's really quite pixelated, and the two scenes are very different, so it doesn't really show off the morph cut, but it really can be quite a powerful tool. To be honest, I don't use it half as much as what I should, especially if you're on YouTube and you're doing product tutorials or product reviews. It can be really quite nice, and it can be really visually attractive. And the one thing you want to be is visually attractive when you're trying to show a product or a service, and having the morph cut is really quite nice. Non-additive dissolve is kind of, I've never really liked it if I do a pre-render, because it has gone red, so it needs some form of rendering to show it properly. I've never liked it. It kind of just, it doesn't really do anything for me. It doesn't that. But again, it depends what your project is. It depends. I don't know. Maybe you're doing an absolute wacky music video, and that would be exactly what you need. So yeah, we then have immersive video, which is kind of. Let me just show you. I'm going to get the gradient wipe there, and VR gradient wipe, and it's gone before it starts, so you've always got to give a bit more, and yeah, it does exactly what I've shown there. You can add other things because it's a gradient wipe. A gradient, any kind of gradient you can do, like a simple gradient would be, say, white at the top, black at the bottom in a color matte maybe, and it's the gradient as it gradually moves from white to black. This is producing some form of gradient, and you can actually select an image to replace the gradient. It's never a transition I've ever used before, and as a result, I don't really rate it. These are light leaks, and they're not the best light leaks in the business. It kind of it does what you want it to, kind of, but I've never liked the light leak built in to Premiere Pro. We have light rays, which is very similar to light leaks. Again, these kind of things you need to drag out a little bit more. I mean, that's very 1996. It's really quite dated. I'm not too sure why Adobe haven't updated their transitions in a long time. These are the same ones that were around when I first started playing with Premiere Pro. But I mean, VR random blocks, yeah, okay, maybe if you like. Again, you can deep dive and maybe change it up a bit. The block width, brilliant. Doesn't really do anything for me. Random seed, I mean, it's a non-transition for me, really. We have iris. Iris is quite good if you like that sort of thing. Just a nice boom. You see how it's cut. So let's just take a second and work out what this is doing, because you could do this. You couldn't quite yet because we haven't got into keyframing, but you can see that what this has done is it's placed this clip already playing in here, like we had before with the dissolve that was continuing in, even though we only started at the cut. But what this is doing is it's added a crop, and then it's moving the crop out. See, there's no actual growth here. It's just the crop is opening up to reveal the next clip. So that's an iris box. An iris box. An iris cross does exactly the same, but it's a little bit more. See where the crop is now? That'll be quite hard to do manually. So that's, if you're looking for that, that's always good. Diamond is the diamond shape, but you can change the border width in stuff like this. So if you upped it a little bit, you see how we've now got a kind of stroke, and you can then change the color if that's the kind of thing you wanted to do. So we have that. I mean, it's not necessarily my taste or my style, but that's quite a powerful thing to have in Premiere Pro. That's quite nice. Still, it's been around since it kind of began. And then we have iris round, which is more like an iris, which I think was the genesis of the iris effect. And then they just changed the shape. You see how halfway through we are at pretty much a complete circle, and then we go past and out the boundaries to reveal at the end. These can all be used in the right circumstance. Page peel and page turn are kind of what you'd expect them to be. I don't know, I think it could be done better. Page turn is the same, but it's more like a fold and coming down. I mean, it is clever because you're seeing the reflection of this here, where you can see our pergola or pergola, and you can see that coming down, and it is, if you look at the actual video, it has flipped it round to show it in reverse on the other side of the page, but I don't know, it just doesn't really impress me. The ones that a lot of people use are push, so you can push it to one side if you want to drive on the story. You can also change the direction, so say that's pushing to the left. If we highlight it and click here, we want it to push to the right. But this is a very linear movement, and by linear I mean it starts and it stops. There's no, it's what we call easing in graphic design and motion design, and it's where you start slow, you ramp up speed, and then you slowly slow down again. It's those little things that you don't necessarily notice and your audience don't notice, but when you have something other than a linear movement, it just shows it that little bit better. And if you have that, it's these, again, it's these little attentions to detail, and when you have them and you have a number of them in one project, it just levels up the quality. Slide is very similar to push in as much as you see how rather than push where everything moves, you see how A is moving off and B is moving in. If you have slide, one just slides over the top. Again, that's going to the right. You can have it going to the left if you want. So these are manipulatable, is that a word? Within the effects controls as well. If you haven't noticed already, the effects controls panel is a really, really important part of Premiere Pro. Just a couple more. Split is exactly that, split from the center, and you can have it going top to bottom as well, just by making sure you've highlighted this and selecting the different arrows which denote the direction of this particular transition. And whip, finally, within the slide section. It's kind of like it's a movement, it's kind of like a push, but it also has kind of a motion blur in there as well. Yeah, it doesn't really do anything for me. Wipe are, I mean, as you can see, there are so many here. Band wipe is a really old effect, but it works and people still use it. They really do. Barn doors are exactly what you think. It's just a center split, but it's called barn doors in the industry. It's so strange. We have Venetian blinds, which is a real hark back to 1980s cinema, and they used to drag out that kind of transition. I'm going through these for numerous reasons. One is almost like a walk down memory lane for me, but also to show you how easy it is to be able to switch out a transition and try different transitions and see what works for you. Cross zoom, I mean, that's probably the most impressive one that you could do. I mean, it's not always to be used. Do you know what? Let's use that as my way of going to the next bit, because as I said, I was going to talk about some plugins, and this one is free, and the transitions that I show you are within the free starter pack, so you'll never have to pay for it and you can use it whenever you want. But let's take that cross zoom. Now you may think that that's impressive. That effectively zooms in and then zooms out. Okay, let's get rid of that. And without explaining anything, I'm just going to show you this, and then we'll get to the point where I'll show you what I'm talking about. A quick restart there, and this is Premiere Composer. So we did in to out, yeah? Camera zoom, in to out. So not only do we have a transition, we also have a sound. Let's just leave the sound out for now. Play ahead where it needs to be, right between the two clips, and add. Now, let me just disable that for now, and let's just show you that cross zoom again. And now let's compare that to this. Now that may not look like much, but that's got easing in there. It's got everything. And if we drag that out a little bit, just like we did the other transitions, that for me is just, I love it. Also, we can add a sound. I will explain this very, very shortly. But now we've got the sound in. A little bit of sound design goes a long way. How cool does that look? Now let's get rid of that. And rather than an in to out, let's just do a simple zoom in. And this is when a zoom transition can really come into its own. Oh, how good does that look? Love it. Absolutely love it. But say you don't want to zoom, you want to pan. So like move to the side. Okay, let's just turn off those sounds for now. I'm going to pan, and I'm going to go pan left. I'm going to include sound, and I'm going to add. I don't think you'll realize just how lucky you are to be in a time when these things are available. That literally was one click to select it and one click to add it. Another click to say, yeah, add sound. And that effect right there, that single effect, which could not be duplicated and just made into a single click effect, that used to take between 10 and 15 minutes when you got fast to be able to do that. It's just, oh, I love it. I'm going to spend some time on Premiere Composer later on in the course. It's by a company called Mr. Horse. And you've probably already noticed, but there are a series of links at the bottom of the worksheet. And those are external links that I have collated to include the things that we're talking about. And they're things that I really value as a professional videographer, professional editor in the industry for well over 7 years. I think it's actually 8, but I don't really want to admit that because it kind of gives away my age, at least maybe slightly. But yeah, and I use them on a day-to-day basis, and I use at least one element, if not more, in all of my projects. So any plugins that I include with you will be so useful to you. Transitions can make or break a project. It can elevate what you're doing to a whole new level. But I can't stress it enough. You don't always need a transition. A simple clip going into another clip is timeless. It's classic. You only use a transition when you need to. And again, I can't stress this enough. If you feel the story is being told, not just fine, but as good as it can be without a transition, don't feel you need to put a transition in there. You don't always need to. You really don't. But if you do, make sure your transitions are good quality. I'm just going to do one more, and this is going to touch on what we looked at before. Here's this horrible light leak. I mean, that's going from pink and magenta all the way through to green and cyan, and oh, it's absolutely awful. I know it seems like I'm bashing Premiere Pro. I don't mean to, but there are certain areas where they've really improved in recent years, and then there's some areas that they've literally done nothing. And it's probably because there are so many free solutions out there that they don't really feel the need to, and they're concentrating on the nitty gritty of it. But yeah, again, that is an awful light leak. Get rid of that. Let's get my playhead right to the middle, and let's have a look at our light leaks. I'm just going to move this out a little bit so we can kind of see, and that's probably the one I want. I've got add sound here. Again, this isn't a deep dive into Premiere Composer. We will do that shortly, but there's no sound with a light leak. But if I add that, and we're done. And if I go in and out, how nice is that? I mean, that's just so much better. That's a light leak. If I go into organic light leaks, these are perfect for beauty. I mean, they're so perfect for beauty. This one within organic, I've used this on countless beauty shoots for clients, for beauty clients in the industry. You may have seen a number of adverts on TV that actually have this, because I know that because I produced a video, and I mean, it's just effortless. And you can change the tint. Like, here's the tint here. This says it's blue. We could change it to a horrible garish green. We could get even closer to what Premiere Pro was. But you see how this is staying orange? It's because it's around the edges. See how around the edges is giving the green? You may not be able to see it in this kind of footage, but yeah, this
is such a better light leak than the ones that come built in. But again, we will look at that in a future video. But that is the start and the basics of transitions. I'm very briefly going to go in the next section talking about your default transition and how to decide what your default transition is, and if it's not the one that's set as stock, how to make it your default transition.